Hi, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. My name's EJ Quantumans. Thank you for checking out my YouTube channel. And if you haven't already done so, please make sure you subscribe and stay connected. I've already posted a number of videos online for you to review. Feel free to check them out. Tell me some of your questions, your concerns, your issues, or any other topics you wish to have being discussed moving forward, and I'll see if I can try to accommodate you. Today, I want to be able to have a conversation on these two questions that are oftentimes asked within our Indigenous circles and how Indigenous people interact with one another. But I also ask these two questions when I do public speaking engagements. And for some, it's extremely difficult to answer, while others are perfectly fine to answer them with no difficulty. The questions are, who are you and where do you come from? Two very what seems to be simple questions can be two loaded questions that require two loaded answers. And so I'll give you an example of how this would occur. So for example, when Indigenous people come in contact with one another for the very first time, it's very common to ask one another, hey, where do you come from? Right? Where do you come from? And that question oftentimes provides context into the nation of where this person comes from, perhaps gives insight into the language, the dialect of that region, speaks to perhaps the customs and practices and philosophies that occur in that region. Because remember, not all Indigenous people follow the same philosophies or practices and customs. Language is very different from region to region. Just to give you context, in Ojibwe in Ontario alone, there are approximately 76 dialects how to speak Ojibwe. And so we mustn't be able to generalize and assume that everybody can speak the language and it all means the same, because it really doesn't. So asking where you come from is a very important question. And so it really provides a lot of insight into the territory of where people traditionally come from. The other question is, who are you? And for a lot of people, that's a very difficult question to answer. And that question, both for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, can be extremely challenging to answer. And so it's a question that tends to really take on a new direction for some people. For some people who have no clue where they come from or who they are, it is a question that begins a starting point of that journey. You see, Indigenous people, and I spoke about this previously in a video, very little about clan systems. And in clan systems, it really speaks to one's role and responsibility and how one is supposed to interact and conduct him or herself within the community with all its community members. And so when we have the conversation of who are you, clan systems can be one aspect of answering that question. For me, for example, I come from the Loon clan. Now, anybody who knows Loon clan members were one of the two, I'm not going to say top clans, because there's no hierarchy of the clan systems, but the role of the Loon clan members is to ensure that we have created somewhat balance and order within our community. And oftentimes it can be misunderstood for a person who is a Loon clan member to, one, know it all, two, think they're the boss, and three, power trip or be snobby or think that we are better than anybody else, when absolutely not. If you understand the true essence of clan systems and the role of a Loon clan member, you'll understand it's completely the opposite. It has nothing to do with status. It has nothing to do with egos or power tripping or of any kind. So when I introduce myself to answer the question of who are you, I would answer first off by my Anishinaabe name, which is our spiritual name, we would identify ourselves based on our clan. We would identify the territory of which we come from, and perhaps depending on which conversation or the context of the conversation, you would perhaps discuss or share some of your spiritual colors and your role within the community. This is not necessarily for the introduction from myself to somebody else. It becomes a conversation with our Creator. It's a way of introducing ourselves to our Creator, because what we believe is when I'm introducing myself to the physical form of a person in front of me, I'm speaking to the spirit which is a reflection of the Creator. You see, so this is how that question of who are you becomes very, very relevant. So on the surface, some people would look at this as interesting. You're introducing what you're introducing yourself as to me. I have no clue what you're talking about. But as the person who is introducing themselves, it becomes very clear that if we understand our spirituality, then we understand the purpose and intent of our introduction to the spirit that sits within the physical embodiment of the person we're engaging with, right? So, who are you? Well, obviously I'm a male, and I play many different hats. So therefore, I suppose I could introduce myself from the surface. I'm a male, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I am a hard worker, my background is in social work, in education, my hobbies or my artistry is sewing, I'm a powwow dancer. I could give all the different hats that I wear that make up me, but the question of who are you goes much more deeper than that. It goes to the very core of your sense of self and your being. That's where we try to tap into each time we introduce ourselves of who are you, right? Obviously, we can talk about the geographical region where I come from. So I come from White Sand First Nation, so that'll give you context of who I am as an individual that is of the Northern Woodland Anishinaabe people. That's important to understand. And then when I get into the question of where do you come from, you can talk about the geographical region of which one comes from, but it's also about speaking about your lineage of your bloodline and the people that your ancestors that flow through your bloodline. It's a very spiritual conversation, and that is the very difference of Indigenous people introducing themselves to, say, non-Indigenous people. People who are non-Indigenous tend to give the resume of who they are, but you're much more than that. You're not a resume, right? The core of who you are and the essence of your spirit is what we're referring to. You see, so the question for some when asking who are you and where do you come from, even if you're Indigenous, can be very challenging, right? And so it becomes the starting point of that journey to try to discover what that is, right? And in order to do so, you have to do the work. You have to sit down with your elders and have conversations. You need to reconnect with the territory that you come from. And I spoke about this previously in one of the videos. So it's important that you understand that. Now, some people who perhaps, and I'm going to give the example of the 60 scoop. And those who don't know what the 60 scoop is, it's where the government had taken children literally from their families and adopted them out to non-Indigenous families in most cases. It was another way of stripping identity, right? And we're dealing with the effects of those 60 scoop individuals, and it's a topic that is happening more and more frequently, which is important and necessary. But those who are from the 60 scoop, One, and I always say this, I was just speaking to a friend of mine who was visiting me yesterday, who is also a 60 Scoop survivor. I said to her, but you're much more than a 60 Scoop. Being a 60 Scoop does not define who you are, right? And so we had a conversation about that, and it made sense to her. But for her, she had difficulty trying to connect to the First Nation that she came from, where her traditional territory is. And there is a sense of being disconnected and displaced and not having that foundation of who she is and where she comes from. And so that becomes her journey to take on, to discover it. So it's a very, very loaded question, and I find that some of our families, our individuals rather, from different communities. For example, I have many friends of mine who are Black and Indigenous mix, who happen to be from the 60 Scoop as well, who have no connection or knowledge or any understanding of either communities that their bloodline comes from, and that becomes a challenge. And so my response to those individuals would be to connect with people from both communities and have conversations and create relationships with these people and start having conversations about the backgrounds that they come from. And we can determine who and where his home is, but it's always nice to have an understanding of where your people come from. And that is where the work requires a lot of time and effort. So I urge you to ask one another and have conversations about who are you and where do you come from, and to know that there will be people who will have challenges answering that question. And it's never a question that is intended to be disrespectful or to challenge one's identity. It's nothing to do with that. And I know there's a lot of people out there that become offended when you're asked the question of who are you and where do you come from? And then the response oftentimes are, well, why is that important? Or that's not your business. Or why do you need to know? You know what I mean? And they become very aggressive and very defensive. And it's a question that is hitting a nerve. And so we have to be very mindful and very respectful and careful when we have these conversations, because there are individuals out there that will have difficulties answering that question. And as educators and as elders and as knowledge keepers, our role is to ensure that our community members are always looked after in such a way that there's always going to be a lending, helping hand, and to direct people to the people that might have the answers for them, to help them and guide them throughout their journey of discovering who they are and where they come from. And so I just wanted to leave that with you. I do want to hear some of your thoughts about this conversation. When I typically have this kind of conversation in the setting when I'm working with students, it's usually a program that takes anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks, and it's a discovery of getting into the understanding of where people come from and what is their role in the community, and understanding and embracing whatever that is, right? In order for us to have a strong community, we have to have strong people who have an enhanced knowledge of who they are. And if we don't know who we are, then we're merely just existing. And just existing is fine for some, but for many, there has to be purpose and meaning. So I'll leave that with you. So I ask you the question, who are you? Where do you come from? And have these conversations within your circles. And let's have a conversation moving forward. You guys have a wonderful day and take care of yourself.